Now we're going to show the installation of the speed sensor bracket and the speed sensor pickup and the speed sensor rings. And those parts are the bracket, which is this guy here. And then you'll have the speed ring halves. There's two halves. And when they go together, they'll be a circle like that. And they're very thin. And then you'll have your sensor itself. Should be in the forward box. And the sensor itself looks something like that. This is the potted side. You can see it's kind of glossy. And then this is the face of the sensor. And then these are the two nubs. I'll point these out now so you can see them. We'll have to pay attention to those later on. And then we'll have an M6 nut and bolt, and you'll use a 10mm socket and wrench for this. You're also going to need either a triple square little tool like this, and this is to remove the CV joint bolts. And the CV joint bolt, if it's a triple square, will look kind of serrated on the inside. It has lots of grooves, and this tool fits in there just right. The other option for your CV bolts is an Allen style, and this bolt is bigger than a CV bolt, but I'm using this to show you what it looks like. An Allen has the 6 sides, and then these two are meant to go together. You can't use an Allen on the triple square to remove it, and you can't use the triple square guy on the Allen style bolt. It'll just strip out. So you want to make sure you use the right tool for the right bolt. So you have to look at it closely. And then before you go to remove the bolts themselves, you want to make sure that the bolt head is clean and that there's no debris in there. So you should have a pick so you can clean that out. A lot of times there'll be grease and oil and or dirt built up in there. And if it is, when you go to put the tool in, it can't recess all the way into the head, and so you won't get good engagement and it'll strip very easily. So suppose somebody stripped out the bolt head in the past and it's still in there and you can't get it out. You can take a pair of vice grips and grab the head of the bolt, and with the tool in there, you just have to use just the teeth of the vice grips. With the tool in there and the vice grips, just get it to turn a little bit to loosen up. When the bolt is actually on the CV joint, I'll bring in a little closer here. When the bolt is actually in the CV joint, it is possible to get the teeth of the vice grips on there and just give it a little turn. You can see where the head of the vice grip will hit, but you just need to give it a little turn so that it's loose, and then usually the tool can back it out. If not, you're just going to have to sit there and go little by little with the vice grips to get it out. And then, like I said, we'll need our 10mm ratchet and socket. We'll need a 13mm ratchet and or socket setup or a wrench. And that should be it for the tools. So the first thing we'll do here is, you'll notice on this CV joint set up here, this is the driver's side of the transmission. This is the bell housing. Up here is the clutch slave cylinder, and then this is the transmission mount here on this end of things. So this is the driver's side of the transmission, and I have a CV joint here with a boot on it just to show you guys kind of what it'll look like. This bolt hole here is where everything will happen as far as mounting the speed sensor bracket, and this little bolt here is an it's an M8 bolt, but it's a 13mm socket, and that's just in front of the reverse switch here on your transmission, and that's whether it's a synchro or tool drive. The only thing I'm missing that I don't have, it's kind of unfortunate, is the brace that goes between this bolt, which is why it's here, and this end here on the slave cylinder here. And that brace would normally go from here down to here. So if I get the two in the shot, it goes from here to here. And it's basically just a flat piece of steel like this. It's bent up here so that it can grab the bolt hole, but it's flat down here. And another thing that's you want to pay attention to on the brace that is in between these two, there is a nut and bolt that supports part of the hydraulic line for the clutch slave cylinder. You want to make sure that that nut and bolt setup is removed, and I'll show you that right now. Okay, so the hydraulic line for the clutch is also going to be in this space, and you can see here I'm just kind of holding it where it would be, if I can block some of this light here, I'm holding it where it would be attached to the slave cylinder there, and then it runs down over the axle by the reverse light switch set up here, which is this guy, and it would be bolted right in this area to the bracket, which would be like that. So if you still have the nut and bolt which secures this line to this bracket, remove the nut and bolt from the bracket, and then it's okay if the line just hangs free, it's not going to hurt anything. The reason we need to remove the nut and bolt is because it interferes with the mounting of the speed sensor bracket. So now we have that set up. I'm going to take this out of the way. And what we're going to do first is put the speed ring halves on, and on your CV joint you'll have 6 bolts. Where am I here? You'll have 6 bolts like this, and they'll be in these holes here. And you're also going to have 3 spacers or washers, and they span 2 holes. So they'll look something like that. And there's a third one on there. When you remove or loosen these bolts up, what you want to do is remove the bolt, or the 2 bolts that hold each spacer on, and get rid of the spacer. And we're going to use the speed ring halves as the new spacers. So we'll figure we've removed all 6 bolts already, we've cleaned up this surface area, and then we can go ahead and install the actual ring halves. You may notice on some of your bolts there's a washer between the bolt head. You can leave the washer there. You're just getting rid of this spacer that was there. So let's mock this up and get these in. One more bolt in the way. So now I've mocked this up. Actually, you'd have all 6 bolts in the holes and the bolts tightened down. And that's it for the speed ring. It's just a CV joint, and then you'll have your boot on there. You will have removed the 3 spacers and in place installed the speed ring with the same bolts and the thin washers that were on the bolts if you had them. Now that that's all set, we don't have to worry about the rings themselves. We can now move on to the bracket. The bracket is this guy here, and you'll notice it has a little tab on this end. If I can hold somewhere, there we go. A little tab on this end. The other end has a large oval hole and a smaller oval hole. Basically what's going to happen is this whole assembly is going to get mounted on the transmission in this orientation, and this little bolt hole here is going to line up with this bolt hole here and secure the whole thing to the transmission. So you'll put that through there like that, and then that'll all go into that bolt hole there. One thing I want to point out is that the brace that should be there, and it'll still be mounted on your transmission, it should be mounted between the clutch slave cylinder here and here. The brace will be there, something like that. You're just going to leave it in place and then install arm mount over it. And the little tab on here, this little tab is long enough to reach back into this hole here. So that'll go like that. The brace will be there, and then the bracket will be in place like that. Now before I go ahead and mount this, I'm going to show you guys one other thing, and that is the pickup itself and the bracket. The bracket will be in this orientation on the transmission. The pickup, the side that is not potted, which is this side. The potted side is kind of a glossy black. The side that is not potted is what faces the speed ring. So once the bracket's on, you just slip this in there. As you can see it that way. You're just slipping it in from the outside into the bracket. And then once the O-ring slips through, It's seated all the way, and then it has this hole here, which will line up with that hole there, and then you'll go ahead and install your M6 nut and bolt. So I'm just going to do that now, just so it stays in place loosely. Okay. So now speed sensor pickup is mounted in. You can see the non-potted side is facing us right now, and that's correct. We'll leave this loose. We will use this as our mock bracket that should be there. And we've got the stock bolt that came from that location, so I'm going to slip the bolt into the bracket and then go ahead and assemble the whole thing. I've just snugged up the bolt there that mounts the whole bracket to the transmission. Our speed sensor itself is still loose, and the bracket itself is still kind of loose. Remember, this brace here would not be moving, just this bracket. This is still kind of loose. And basically what I'm going for is I want to make sure that the speed sensor is as close to the ring as it can be without actually touching it. And I want to make sure that the angle or the rotation of it in this direction is also parallel to the ring. And then once you've got those two set, that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt this together, and then I'll bring you back in for a close-up shot. I'm going to use my 10mm socket and wrench to tighten this, and my 13 for this one here. Okay, so there you have it. I've now tightened up the M6 bolt with a 10mm nut and wrench. I've tightened up the 13mm, or the M8 bolt here, that's a 13mm socket. I've got the bracket mounted on top of the brace that should be here. It'll look something like that, but it goes all the way up to the slave cylinder here. And what we're paying attention to here is actually how close the speed sensor pickup is to the ring. And you want to get this as close as possible. And you also want to have it so that the, if I can zoom in here, you also want to have it so that the nubs, won't focus that close. You also want to have it so that the nubs on the speed sensor itself, I pointed out to you earlier, these guys here are essentially in line with the ring. And that's about it. And you can see I've got it pretty close. You don't really want it much further than that. You want it as close as it can be without touching the sensor. If it does touch the sensor and scrape it a bit, that's fine. You certainly don't want to leave it so long that it cuts into the sensor and ruins it. But if it touches it here and there, that's fine. But then you need to go back and adjust it so that it doesn't constantly rub on it, because then it will destroy it. Another thing I'll point out is this is the bracket where the wire that goes to the speed sensor will run on top of. And it's in this area where you'll put a zip tie over here. And we cover that in the SKW. But for now, just remember that this is the area where the wire is going to run, and this is where you'll put your zip tie, right here. And that's just to secure the wire so that whatever excess is there can't get caught in the ring on the axle or any other moving part. Because remember, the arm here on the slave cylinder, this arm does move. This guy moves up and down. You want to keep anything that can get caught in there away from that. But that's essentially it. You want to make sure you tighten these guys down. You can use a little thread lock on there if you want. And then just make sure you use the correct tool to remove them. And if they are stripped out, you can use a pair of vice grips on them to take it out. And that's about it. That is the installation of the speed sensor pickup and mount.